Modern versus Tetris needs to change. Over my years playing this game, it's become pretty clear to me that it's very flawed and that something needs to be done. However, if you ask a versus Tetris player what the problems are, you'll get different answers from everybody. In this video, I'm going to be ranking 9 different arguments against versus Tetris on a tier list based on their impact on the game and how fundamental the problems are to it. We'll start from the D tier, where arguments have no weight at all, and move our way to the S tier, which are the best arguments for change. Also, some disclaimers. This list is very subjective and should be treated as such. If you want to talk about what you think about some of these placements, feel free to leave a comment about it. Also, to make things clearer, I'll only be talking about the versus side of modern Tetris, not single player. Lastly, by talking about the flaws of modern Tetris, this is in no way an endorsement of classic Tetris or other types of games like TGM. It's not that I particularly dislike them, but it's just outside the scope of this video. With that being said though, let's get into the list. So, let's start off in D tier. Here, we'll have some of the worst arguments you'll ever find, usually made out of complete ignorance. To kick off the D tier, we have no skill. The gist of this argument goes like this. Modern Tetris has added too many mechanics such as hold, 7-bag, ghost piece, 5 previews, SRS, and many other things which have removed the difficulty of stacking. As Tetris is a game about stacking, the act of stacking should be challenging, and therefore the game is flawed. You basically won't ever hear anybody who actually plays modern Tetris saying this, and it's an argument made with the assumption that because everyone can stack, it means that there's no skill in stacking. This is simply not true, as the ability to stack is constantly the main skill that's being tested in versus Tetris, as you have to stack cleanly to T-spin, adapt to garbage, downstack, and basically do anything properly. Modern Tetris is undeniably skill-based, and putting 2 players of different skill levels against each other in a sufficiently long set will almost always end in the better player winning, making this a D-tier argument. For my second D-tier pick, we have T-spins shouldn't exist. So this is another argument you'll almost never hear any modern Tetris player making. The argument goes like this. T-spins reward so much in so few lines that there's pretty much no reason to do anything else. Because of this, clearing things like Tetris has become irrelevant. At a surface level, for people who don't play a lot of modern Tetris, this seems true. However, in practice, versus Tetris splits stacking into 2 parts, upstacking and downstacking. T-spins are efficient to upstack, but other clears like combos, Tetrises, and even regular singles, doubles, and triples are much more prevalent in downstacking. Even in upstacking, you can't clear only T-spins, and even if you want to maximize the amount of T-spins, you'll need to have very good stacking. In its less extreme form, this argument would be calling for a T-spin nerf because Tetrises should be stronger, but in most cases, T-spins serve as a better reward to good stacking than Tetrises, justifying the reward. With all these reasons considered, this one lands in D tier. With those out of the way, let's move on to C tier. I'll be putting arguments that are misguided but have a bit of truth in them here. For this tier, I'll be picking memorization game. This argument is one that's usually made against T-spin setups. It goes like this. T-spin setups are some of the most powerful attacks you can do, and the setups and forms are ones that you need to memorize. Since there's so many different T-spin setups, modern Tetris overvalues memorization. There's several problems with this argument, so first let's talk about good setup usage. To use T-spin setups well, you'll need to have the right amount of T-pieces for it. If you don't, you'll be forced to stack the sides while stalling for a piece, usually ending in an inefficient upstack. Second, you'll need to make sure you can build it in very few pieces. Since you want to avoid needless stacking, you also don't want to be waiting on many pieces for the setup. For these reasons, something like a very clean mid-game trinity is very hard to do and rarely happens because you'll need 3 T-pieces and a board that would support a trinity in around 2 blocks. For these reasons, only a few setups are really viable, ones which don't use a lot of T-pieces and can be completed from regular boards in a few pieces. Additionally, T-spin setups are pretty much only for upstacking, so most versus players, even high-ranking ones, opt just to not use T-spin setups, since they're too difficult to be efficient with. However, there's a growing class of players, most are lower level, but some have reached places like X rank in Tetrio, and that is opener mains. The idea is that if you kill your opponent with your opener, you won't ever need to learn how to improvise. It really only works in lower skill brackets or Tetrio, but it was enough to win an Underdog's Cup, with Zynex literally having a 3 PPS DPC and a 1 PPS mid-game, winning probably the wackiest tournament run in Tetris history. Anyways, memorization game's gonna go in C tier for me. Let's go to B tier now. So these are going to be some of the very popular arguments among versus players, which I'll also agree with to an extent. However, they're also arguments I feel are kinda weak. Anyways, our first one is combo system. Without a doubt, this is the most complained about and cited problem in modern Tetris, and even in Tetris as a whole. Generally, you'll hear people saying that 4-wide is OP, and that the combo table needs to be nerfed to account for it. So the problem here is that given the scaling nature of combos, things like 4-wide will pretty much always be strong. By scaling, I mean that even if combos were to cap at 3 max instead of the current 5 in most games, there would still come a point where 4-wide is sending a higher attack per line than anything else in the game. So anyways, the people calling for a nerf to 4-wide tend to not understand how it scales, and it leads to things like this proposal being pushed to TTC, which does pretty much nothing to impact how strong 4-wide is. If you want to weaken 4-wide to any significant amount, you'll have to attack the scaling. Some proposed solutions to this are that combo damage goes down after a certain point, combos sending nothing after 12, combos resetting after a certain amount, and many more. In general though, people tend to understand the situation with 4-wide very poorly. The more rare form of this argument says that power stacking is the issue, and that combo rewards unclean and brainless stacking. In faster games, this is true, since it's much better to build up a stack quickly without a solid plan for it and resolve using a combo. However, power stacking is also the only thing in any Tetris meta right now that involves any significant risk and reward, so I'd argue it's not entirely bad or unhealthy, but that might just say more about the other problems that Tetris has. Anyways, it's still a pretty decent argument, held back by the sheer amount of misunderstandings around it, so I'll give it a solid B tier. For my next pick, we have too fast. So this is an argument you might be surprised to hear is made by lower and higher level players. It's mostly targeting the unrestricted games like Tetrio and Tetris, which have a pretty much limitless speed cap. The argument goes like this. Efficiency doesn't matter as much if you can just play faster, and things like timing become way less relevant if each second waited is just costing you something like 3 pieces. This argument is actually pretty valid, and everything said there is true to a decent extent. Of course, you still need to make efficient placements, but the value of each piece is heavily diluted when you crank the speed. However, I think that the fact that people play brainlessly fast is indicative of other flaws in Tetris, rather than the problem being caused by the ability to play fast, which I'll talk about later in the higher tiers. I also think that fast and slow Tetris games can coexist and both be good games, making the speed preferential. But yeah, with that being said, too fast makes it to B tier. For my last B tier choice, we have RNG game. Alright, let's talk about luck. There's a decent amount of influence that luck plays in Tetris. This argument is a broad description of things like garbage hole spawns, lucky downstacks, and more. It's especially relevant in games like Puyo Puyo Tetris, since garbage has a random chance to become messier when received. Additionally, in games like Tetrio, spikes can occur from the multiplier without a lot of skill, as players stumble their way into 20 spikes at the lower ranks on complete accident. It's a pretty simple argument, and it's true that rounds are completely swung by complete chance. However, things like this are almost always just an inconvenience and are just tilting. If you don't get tilted, the better player will still win, given a significantly long set. Because these events only have a big impact on the mental game, I'll be giving RNG game a B tier. Alright, now with the B tier done, we can start getting into some of the really good arguments. These are all ones I totally agree with and talk about all the time. Also, with each of these, I'll be giving my reasons why they aren't S tier. With that being said, let's get into our first A tier argument, downstacking is OP. So this argument is something that will make a lot more sense the better you get at the game. Basically, Once you get good enough at downstacking, it's the solution to pretty much every problem you face. The reason is because garbage is free lines, so instead of stacking up, you can use your garbage and be several times more efficient. The only game that's really free from this problem is Puyo Puyo Tetris, and that's because the game has a ton of line clear delay and cheesy garbage, making upstacking much more viable. If you watch any higher level play, downstacking is pretty much always the right choice when available. This has kind of led to the Tetris meta being one where people don't take any risks, because being safe is also the most efficient way of attacking. This problem has spawned entire playstyles, such as QMK's Infinite Downstack, where he downstacks the entire game until he finds a good combo and then wins. Now don't get me wrong, downstacking still takes a lot of skill to do, and not everyone can downstack well, but that doesn't mean it can't be overpowered. Generally, as you go up in skill level, you'll see downstacking become more and more important until it eventually becomes the entire game at the highest levels of play. The only thing stopping this from being an S tier argument for me is that it really doesn't affect most of the player base, but it's still a big fundamental flaw that needs to be ironed out. But yeah, all in all, A tier. Alright, that's it for the A tier. Now let's get to the best of the best. This tier has stuff that's pretty much core to modern Tetris, and the game would need to be restructured and played entirely differently to solve them. Let's get to the first S tier pick, being Always 100%. Always 100% is an argument that has to do with the pacing and different game states at mid to high level play. It goes like this. Tetris is a game that suffers from terrible pacing. The path from the start of a round to when someone tops out has no build up. If you watch, say, a Jester's Cup VOD, you'll see that the state of the game resets constantly, and people just play until someone dies through either a mid-stop or a big downstack combo. Whether the round ends in 30 seconds, 1 minute, or 2 minutes, it's all the same. Due to the temporary nature of garbage, only the last garbage line really matters, so the line between living and dying is very thin. I describe this as a game being at 100% intensity all the time. Now, having a game always at 100% intensity might not sound bad, but it actually makes the game pretty stale to both play and watch. There's a kind of yin and yang effect where if the game is at 100% all the time, there's nothing special about any of it and nothing really stands out. You could almost describe the game as anticlimactic. In a fighting game, you lower your opponent's HP, so the danger increases as the game goes on. In a MOBA, farming and getting kills in the early game will give you a tangible advantage, which can be snowballed into taking objectives and winning the game. In both of these examples, a win is the result of events that happened before it. However, what happens at the end of a Tetris round will usually be the only thing that's relevant to the win, and pretty much everything that happened before it doesn't matter. This argument has a lot in common with downstacking as OP, so it's not huge early on, but it becomes more relevant as the skill level increases and people are better at downstacking. Anyways, this one's an easy S tier for me, as it makes competitive versus Tetris terrible to watch, and it also makes it pretty stale to play relative to other deeper games. For our last one, this is in my opinion the best argument against the current design of modern versus Tetris. As the final pick on our list in S tier, we have action and reaction. In pretty much any competitive PvP game, there's a lot of actions that you'll take that will elicit a response from your opponent. For example, if I were to throw a projectile and smash, my opponent will probably be forced to either jump, shield, or get hit. In this case, there's an action and a reaction. However, in Tetris, the garbage is extremely unintrusive. It never really requires you to change your plan, since you usually just expect it to be coming anyways. I'd even go as far as to say that you don't really react to garbage, but it's more like an obstacle to act upon. For an example of an abstract versus puzzle game having interactive gameplay, let's look at Puyo Puyo. There's 3 factors that make the chaining gameplay have actions and reactions. That is, it takes time to build chains, it takes time to resolve a chain, and garbage comes from the top and covers your Puyos. For these reasons, players will develop a main chain, but they'll also try and take shots at their opponent through smaller chains that resolve quickly. What both players do relies heavily on what their opponent is doing. If one of these can connect, they'll cover their opponent's board with garbage, allowing them to resolve their main chain safely and claim the win. Compare that with Tetris, where you only gain a marginal advantage by acknowledging your opponent's existence. The point being, since there's proper risk and reward attached to things, and since you can disrupt your opponent directly, they've created interaction. Even with things like timing, it really doesn't feel like interaction. When you time, it usually just boils down to waiting for your opponent to send to cancel or waiting for them to send to accept. So yeah, I believe that it's impossible for Versus Tetris to work competitively in its current form, with there being very little interaction between the players. In the end, it makes the game have a lot less depth than you'd ever imagine. Now, this isn't to say that Tetris garbage needs to be disruptive, but more like there should be some kind of way to disrupt your opponent, or cause them to reconsider their moves. In Versus, even if you see your opponent making a horrible mistake, such as a huge misdrop, it's not like your plan really changes, since you still need to try and send more garbage. For these reasons, I'll be putting action and reaction in the S tier, finishing off our list. Anyways, thanks for watching. If you want to discuss the arguments and rankings, leave a comment or join my Discord server, link in the description. Also, come watch my streams over at twitch.tv/garbocan_. I stream every day at 7 PM PST, and you can ask me all kinds of Tetris questions there if you like. Special thanks for this video goes out to my Patreon supporters, I'm Sorry Julia and Rutabaga. If you want to support these videos and other Tetris projects, consider supporting me there. They actually picked this video topic too, and I'll be putting out another poll on the next video in a few days after the upload of this one. So yeah, that's it for me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.